All right. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Jama Shelton. I use the pronouns they and them. I'm an associate professor here at the Silverman School of Social Work Central College. And I'm excited to talk to you today about how binary thinking is holding you back. But wait, Geetha, did you leave your keys up here? No. Somebody left their keys up here. Is that your standard? Well, I hope they realize that they left them here and come back and get them. Hope they come back. These are my keys, but I was doing a thing there. Did you see what I did? Someone left their keys here. That's a thing we do all the time with pronouns. When we don't know someone's pronoun, we use they and them. So I know sometimes when I say I use they and them pronouns, people kind of freak out that they're going to mess it up or, whatever, but we do it all the time, actually. So that's your encouragement around that. So I remember the first time I was asked by someone else if I was a boy or a girl. I was 5 years old. I was in the Walmart with my grandma in Arkansas. I got older, kept getting the same question. Question stayed the same. Still didn't really know how to answer that question. 30 years later, I had a therapist who said to me, if you're really bothered by people asking you that question, why don't you just dress differently? So the next week, I went back and tried to explain to her how that wasn't actually the best thing to say. And she said that I was turning her into my mother and got really defensive, and so I never went back. Then I learned one way I can answer that question. Are you a boy or a girl? No. But so that's not really the point about my therapist, but one of the points is that humans categorize. That's what we do. And if you're a seeing human, you usually categorize what you see visually. What am I seeing? What do I do with it in my brain? Who is this person? What sense can I make of this in this moment in my brain, right? So we're gonna do a little activity together. Seeing something. Look at the next slide, please, and just see what you see. Okay. Who saw a rabbit? Who saw a duck? All right. So there's this cool thing that what you know can influence what you see. So now you know it can be a rabbit. It can also be a duck. Do you see the rabbit? Raise your hands if you see the rabbit. You see the duck? Raise your hands if you see the duck. Okay, yeah. So that can be a rabbit or a duck. So again, what you know influences what you see. And there's some good news here, right? Because that means you can know more and see more, right? And you can help other people do that too as social workers and as educators. You have the power to learn more, you have the power to see more and to help others do the same, as long as you're willing to, right? So one way that we can do this is by expanding binary thinking. And now you all know my thing is gender, and we do binaries in many ways. So it's not just gender, right? But that's my lens, so that's probably mostly what I'll be talking about. We do it with sex, we do it with gender. Man, woman, boy, girl, female, male, right? We do it with kinds of relationships, hetero, homo, right? You're straight, you're gay. We do it that way. We do it with race, really, people of color and white. And we all know that that is incredibly limiting. We treat things like they're the same when there's a bazillion ways to be in each of these categories. Infinite number of ways to be. So the other thing about binaries is that they create hierarchies, just inherently. When there's one or the other, it ends up creating a hierarchy where one is perceived in mainstream society as, air quote, like better than the other, right? And that is also how we see all of the isms being replicated and reinforced, right? So white supremacy, white people are, air quote, better than people of color. That is, if that gets out as a clip from this talk, as something that I'm saying, I will destroy all the videos. That is not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the way binary thinking manifests and perpetuates oppressions, right? So men are seen as better, more valuable than women, heterosexual couples more so than queer couples, cis people more so than trans people. But when we categorize people in that way and pretend as if everyone in a certain box is the same, it actually just literally erases people and their experiences, right? And I want to tell you just real quick kind of what that actually feels like. To me, as an almost 50-year-old professional, pretty smart person, I think, with a solid support network and coping mechanism. So what it feels like is who you are doesn't matter to me. And I'm not even sure like what you are, but I know that probably it's maybe not real. And your identity is too complicated for me to understand or bother with. And actually, I don't know, maybe I just don't care. So that to me is the antithesis of how we as social workers should be making people feel, right? And I'm a solid person, I can kind of handle that. But I think about our students and I think about the people we work with. And this becomes really important to me. It's beyond myself and to the communities where I work, right? And for me, it's not life and death, but for many, 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 many people, it is life and death, right? So that was a serious moment. So I'm going to shift gears for a minute. Who in the room likes pie? Raise your hand if you like pie. Right, yeah, I mean, I really like pie. Also, there's meringue pies. I think that's a key line. Chicken pot pie if you're into savory. And as Geetha pointed out, a quiche, which is basically an egg pie. Pies, all pies. Apple pie, berry pies. Pies are good. We agree pie is good. Most people like pie. Do you know what else we might all agree is good as social workers? Equity. People think equity is good? All right. So the cool thing about equity, though, is unlike pie, if I share mine with you, I don't get less. How about that? But people seem to think that to move towards equity, particularly around issues of race and gender, will result in some sort of skewed mess of scraps that we all have to fight over at the dinner table, right? But that's not what it's like. So we agree pie is good, equity is good, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say actually equity is better than pie, given the way it works. But again, that's not how society at writ large is sort of thinking of it. It's why there's so much conflict in particularly around identity politics and what's happening right now. I advanced too quickly. So for example, right now, there's a huge move to pit cis women against trans people, but really we're talking about trans women in a lot of the bills that we're seeing at the state level in southern states that are framed as women's bills of rights. Because somehow the existence of trans people takes away the existence of and rights of cis women. That's the framing. It's not true. Let me ask you a quick question. How many people have gotten health care in the last year? Right? How many people have gotten gender-affirming health care in the past year? Okay. Question for you. When you go to a healthcare provider, does your provider acknowledge, respect, and affirm your gender? Do they? Okay, guess what, y'all? Congratulations. You have received gender-affirming healthcare. The reason I'm saying that, the reason this is an important thing to talk about, is that the way we frame our issues really matters, right? Things aren't always what they seem at first glance. So when we talk about gender-affirming healthcare, we're creating this thing over here that people who aren't trans think doesn't matter to them. It's not relevant. Creates a separate category. It's like other thing. Has nothing to do with me. But actually, everyone who receives healthcare receives some form of gender-affirming care. In fact, I'm going to say gender-affirming care should mean healthcare. Healthcare should mean care for everyone, right? It's important to think about how we frame things. For example, here's some new pieces of legislation, federal, U.S. House bill, right? Protect Minors from Medical Malpractice Act, Protect Children's Innocence Act, Preventing Violence Against Female Inmates Act, Preventing Parental Secrecy Policies in Schools Act, Protecting Our Kids from Child Abuse Act, Protecting Children from Experimentation Act. Now, on the surface, we probably all agree that it's good. We don't want our children to be experimented on. We don't want violence against people. We want to protect our children's innocence. No? Yeah? All right. This is what they really mean. This is the subtext, right? This is actually the language. I'm not making this up. The Protect Minors from Medical Malpractice Act is to protect children from medical malpractice in the form of gender transition procedures. The Protecting Our Kids from Child Abuse Act is a bill to establish a federal tort against pediatric gender clinics and other entities pushing gender transition procedures that cause bodily injury to children or harm the mental health of children. Preventing parental secrecy policies in schools to require a state receiving funds pursuant to Title II of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 to implement a state policy to prohibit a school employee from conducting certain social gender transition interventions, which means to call someone by their name and pronoun. That is what a certain social gender transition intervention is. Okay, so things are not always what they seem on first glance, right? So something that we really need to be doing in order to move towards more equity around gender, but all areas of oppression, one thing we can do is begin to expand binary thinking. The other is, remember that just because somebody gets more rights doesn't mean you get less rights. And the idea that what you know influences what you see. So the more you know, the more you're able to perceive. But you have to be willing to know something else, and you have to be willing to see something else. And then as social workers, you have to be willing to believe what you're hearing and knowing and seeing from the people in front of you. I usually include a quote by Maree Brown, and I didn't do it in this one for some reason, so I'll just say it from his poem, Letters, Numbers. I can't say who I am unless you agree that I'm real. And we all have a role in making sure people know that they are real and that we will connect, reflect, and affirm that when we work with them. So sometimes this gets me down, all this. It's hard work. It's hard to live it and work it and talk about it. So I do turn to Adrienne Maree Brown pretty often in my classes, but also personally, to think about how we move forward. And this also gets to a question Steve asked around scale when Geeta was talking. And Adrienne Maree Brown says that what we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system. So she bases a lot of her work of emergent strategy on fractal thinking. The smallest thing creates a ripple. How you create your life and surroundings on the small scale and the micro has the potential to replicate outward and outward. So I come to that when I'm having a little bit of a hard time. She also says, what would our movements look like if they were led from a place of love? And my students and I talk a lot about this, and they want to know exactly what that means. Like exactly what does that look like? Oh, that's not the right, I just hit slide too soon again. But and I don't know exactly what that means. Like I don't have the answer. Like this is what it means when you lead with love, right? But I think that when we do it, we know it. I think an example was our Trans Day of Visibility campaign that was just about letting people know they matter and not about countering hate, not addressing the hate at all. Because she also says what you pay attention to grows, right? So just real quick to wrap up. When I was a kid, my grandpa used to read me this book. It was my favorite, Lucille. Has anyone ever read this book? Okay. Well, it's about a horse that somehow ends up being dressed up like a lady. Like the farmer's wife dresses her up like a lady because she wants a lady friend. It's full of gender roles and stereotypes. That's not the point. There's another point. And throughout the book, at the end, there's a couple of pages where Lucille, the horse, is just running through the fields, like trying to find the farmer and running through the fields. And as she runs, all of her like girly ladylike clothes fly off. So like her shoes fly off, and her dress flies off, her hat flies off last. And I always loved it. I loved it so much. And I couldn't really figure out why. And then as an adult, I was reading it to my kid, and I had the same feeling. And I was like, I think the feeling was liberation. I think that Lucille was like running towards liberation. And somehow I connected with that even at the age of 5, when I was consistently being asked if I was a boy or a girl, even at the age of 49, where I'm still consistently being asked if I'm a man or a woman now. People don't typically say boy or girl, but so liberation. And I think gender equity is a huge part of the work that we need to do as social workers working towards liberation. That's it.